Hello everyone, it's Robin the Delta Crafter, and I want to thank you for joining me for the Christmas in July series on my YouTube channel for 2022. This is a series of videos posted on my YouTube channel that will hopefully provide you with some holiday inspiration. We are halfway through the year, and as crafters, we start to think about the holidays so that we can get our ideas together and start planning all the products and things that we'll need. So I'm planning to provide you hopefully with some inspiration to get your holiday crafting started. Today's cards will be using the Mugs and Kisses set from Honeybee Stamps. I'll also be using the Bitty Buzzwords Holidays from Honeybee Stamps. I'll be using the stamps and the dies for this. I went into my stash and grabbed a snowflake embossing folder that's a little bit older from Sizzix. I'm going to be using some spun sugar distress ink, and then a little bit later on I'm also going to decide to bring in some weathered wood distress ink as well. To apply those inks down, I'm going to be using a brayer. And then of course I'm going to be doing all of this on some Neenah Classic Crest Solar White in 80-pound weight. I also went into my stash and dug out some of my scraps, and I'm going to be using a piece of light blue cardstock and a piece of red cardstock, a beautiful Christmas red. I'll be adding some heat embossing to these cards, so I'm going to be using some Versamark embossing ink, and then I'm also going to be using some silver embossing powder that I just grabbed from my stash as well. Let's go ahead and get started. So the very first thing that I want to do to start creating these cards is to create my background. So I'm going to bring in that snowflake embossing folder and a piece of Neenah Classic Crest Solar White in 80-pound. And I'm going to just spritz this paper just a little bit, just to make it a little moist, so that when I run it through my embossing machine, the embossing takes to the paper really well. So I'm inserting my piece of lightly misted cardstock into my embossing folder. I ran that through my embossing machine, and you can see the beautiful embossing I was able to achieve. I like using the technique of adding a little bit of water. It really helps the fibers take the embossing folder designs really well. So I want to make sure that I accent these snowflakes. So I'm going to run my brayer across my spun sugar distress ink. And I'm going to lightly run my brayer across the raised area of my embossed paper. And what that's going to do is going to turn my snowflakes pink. If you just use a light hand, you'll be able to get your raised areas of your embossed paper and not the other parts. I love the effect that this accenting these snowflakes is going to give this design. Look how pretty that is. So I'm going to do that a couple more times on the remaining pieces of cardstock, and then it's time to move on to the next part. So I'm going to bring in those dies from the Mugs and Kisses set. And one of the things that I love about this set is that there's a left-handled mug and a right-handled mug. So you have lots of options and choices of how you want to lay out your card. For this design, we're actually going to use both of these mugs. So I'm going to put both dies down. I'm going to tape them down with some Easy C tape to hold them in place. And then I'm going to run the mugs as well as the heart die cut through my die cutting machine several times so that I can get 6 mugs and 6 hearts. And here are all the pieces that I've die cut so far. I love how in this die set they thought about all the details. So that little oval is actually the inside of the mug. So it makes it look like you can fill that in with whatever you want your inside beverage to look like. So for these cards, we're going to be making some cocoa. So I'm going to cut out the ovals, 6 ovals from a brown cardstock. And then there's also the option to add some whipped cream to the top of your beverage. So I'm also going to cut out 6 whipped cream toppings. Now that I have all the die cut pieces ready to go, I'm going to do a little bit of inking on the die cuts to give them some dimension, so that they kind of don't just all fall flat on the card. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in some stormy sky blue ink, and I'm going to ink up the edges of my mugs, the blue mugs, with this stormy sky. You're going to see just how much dimension and texture inking these edges is going to give these die cuts. Adding a little bit of inking to die cuts is a simple thing that will take your card images to the next level. It just really makes them look more realistic and just adds a lot of wow to your cards. So I'm taking what little bit of ink that remains on my brush, and I'm going to add some of that to the bottom of the white mugs as well. Now for the cocoa inserts, I'm going to ink those up with some tea dye ink. And I'm actually going to come in with a little bit of vintage photo as well. So I decided to pull out one of my older ink pads that I've had from Stampin' Up, and this is Smoky Slate, and I'm going to add some of that inking to the whipped cream just to make it look like there's a little bit of shadow on those swirls of whipped cream. Now I'm going to add some festive berries to my hearts, and I'm going to again add a little bit of inking to the edging to just kind of give it a little bit of dimension. I'm using the small brushes from Simon Says Stamp for this inking, which worked out well. So now I'm going to do a little bit of assembly. I'm going to add my little cocoa parts, and to me this is where the mugs really started to come to life. I'm going to add the little cocoa to the insert to the inside of the mug, and now it's really starting to look like a hot beverage. I think that is just the cutest thing. So I decided that I wanted to have my heart kind of have a little bit of dimension, but not just with the inking. So I brought out my stylus, which this is an old stylus that I've had for several decades, from way back in my scrapbooking days, and a foam pad, and I'm using the stylus to kind of curl up the edges of my heart from the back side, and that's going to give me a puffy look on the heart when I put it onto the mugs. So I'm finished working on all of my die cuts. Now it's time to move on to my sentiments. So I'm going to bring in my Rabbit Hole Designs embossing powder tool. I'm going to put some embossing powder across my piece of Nina Classic Crest Solar White cardstock, because I'm going to be doing some embossing. I'm going to emboss my sentiments. So I've chosen a few of the sentiments from the sentiment set, the Bitty Buzzwords holiday set. And now I'm getting ready to stamp those with the Versamark ink onto this piece of cardstock. This Versamark ink is a sticky ink. It's an embossing ink that once I apply the embossing powder will stick to this ink, and then I'll be able to move to the next step. So I'm just close the door of my MISTI and rub my microfiber cloth across the door to make sure that I get even pressure across all of my images so that they make a good impression on my cardstock. Now that I've done that, I'm going to bring in my silver embossing powder and a coffee filter, and I'm just going to sprinkle some of that embossing powder across my stamped images. And this is going to give me the silver images that I'm going to later heat set. So sprinkle some of that silver embossing powder, and the coffee filter is going to catch all of my excess powder and allow me to pour it back into my little jar there. My heat tool was warming up on the side, so now I'm going to bring that in and melt this silver embossing powder and finish off these larger sentiments. I'm going to bring in the coordinating dies and die cut these sentiments out so that they'll be nice and crisp and ready to apply to my card. And here they are, nice and die cut. I love the way that Honeybee always has die cuts to go with their sentiments. I really, really appreciate that. So I picked out a few sub-sentiments to go along with the larger sentiments. And now I'm stamping those in some VERSAFINE Onyx Black ink and going to trim those out on my trimmer and have those ready to go. And then it'll be time to assemble the cards. So here are all our pieces that we've die cut, we've heat embossed, we've inked up, and now it's time to assemble. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to put some foam tape on the back of our embossed panels. Yes, they are embossed, so they're already sitting up a little bit, but I want to add a little bit more dimension to them, so the foam tape is the perfect way to do that. You can also use craft foam, which I have done before, if you don't want to use foam tape. You guys know that these Stampin' Up! Foam squares are my absolute favorite. So I'm applying a couple of those to the back of my hearts that, remember, I puffed those up with using my my stylus. So now those foam squares in the back of the hearts are going to make sure that the puffiness stays standing up. I'm applying my panels to some Accent Opaque 120 pound weight cardstock. That's what I'm using for my card bases. I'm making sure those are nice and securely attached to my card bases. By the way, all the products that I'm using today will be listed and linked on my coordinating blog post that can be found on my website, thedeltacrafter.com. So here I'm just trying to figure out what kind of configuration I want for all of the pieces that I want to add to these cards. So I've got 2 in the pink and I have 1 in the gray or weatherwood. So I'm applying those puffy hearts to the front of the mugs, which I think is the cutest little accent. And now I'm trying out the whipped cream foam, and I'm trying to figure out how do I want to place those. Now it's time to dry fit all the sentiments and kind of figure out where everything needs to go. Some of the sub-sentiments go before the larger scripty sentiment, but some of them go after the sentiment. So got to kind of figure out how I'm going to lay everything out and how it's all going to fit together on the card. Lots to play around with and figure out here. I'm liking what I'm seeing so far. So we're going to bring in some Barely Arts glue and we're going to start adhering everything to the card bases. These are our final steps here, just making sure that everything is glued down and secure and in the place that I want it all to be. I just love the little accent that whipped cream adds to the top of our mugs. So cute. So I'm going to use my liquid adhesive to glue all of the mugs down. I'm also going to glue all of the whipped cream toppings to the mugs. I'm going to put some liquid adhesive on the back of the sub sentiments. And then for the scripty sentiment, I'm going to use some foam squares or foam tape to pop those up and give those a little bit of dimension on the cards. So I'm going to secure this last sentiment down and then we're going to move on. So I decided that I wanted to add a little bit of sparkle to the cards. So I'm going to bring in my sparkle pen. And I'm going to add some sparkle to the whipped cream topping on each of the mugs. Going to just brush that on. And I haven't used this pen in a while, so it's needing to be have a little bit of that paint expressed to the tip, so that makes sure that all of my toppings get covered nicely. And to add an extra bit of detail to those puffy hearts, I'm going to add a little bit of shimmer to those as well. And with that, these cards are complete. I absolutely adore the way these cards came together. And I want to thank you for joining me for another video on my YouTube channel. I hope you are enjoying all this holiday inspiration that is part of this Christmas in July series for the Delta Crafter. If you have enjoyed it, please consider giving this video a thumbs up, subscribing to the channel, and hitting the notification bell so you can be in the loop of whenever I post new videos. Remember, there's a giveaway at the end of this series, so be sure to comment on each and every video in the series. You can always find me at thedeltacrafter.com, as well as on Instagram and Facebook at The Delta Crafter. Thanks again for joining me, and until next time everyone, enjoy!